There's a chapter in the AP book dedicated to just how to develop a program and a lot of the vocabulary that goes with the program. So I'm going to spend some time just looking at a couple different program development models with this and go through a lot of the vocabulary and what you want to look for. The first piece it covers talks about what is known as the waterfall model. And this is real simply taking a model here and determining out how to develop the program. So I need to move this down. Whee! Okay, you couldn't see that, but it looked pretty cool. With the waterfall model, you need to do an analysis of the specifications, then go through the program design, do the implementation, and that's one of those words I always have trouble spelling. Then you need to do the testing and debugging, and then finally figure out maintenance. It's very similar to developing a website. This model was developed in the 1960s to be more effective. The program specifications, the analysis of the specifications, is simply writing out what the program is supposed to do. It's based off the customer requirements, or if we're looking at game development, it's oftentimes used how you want the game to flow. So you're really getting into the detail. Man, my hand's kind of big there. Into the detail of what we need to have for the game. Once we figure out what we need, then we can get into the design aspect of the game. Even for small-scale programs, taking time to do the designing and the planning will save us a lot of time down the road. So that's something very important for us to consider as well. For implementation, implementation is part of the coding phase. So we're now taking what we designed and what we planned out, and we're implementing it. What the AP book spends a lot of time stressing is the testing and debugging phase. So it's not possible for every possible input to be tested. However, you want to make sure that you choose thorough testing examples. So a real simple example would be a time pay scale program where you calculate whether a person worked the regular 40 hours, had overtime, or had double overtime. So we could take a look, and I think what we'll do to demonstrate this is we'll practice that program, because that's really simple. And we'll show that on the next slide here. And then maintenance, of course, is simply maintaining the program. So those are our 5 steps in the waterfall model to building a program. So I'm going to demonstrate that here on the next slide. So here we are. We're going to create a program that takes how many hours an employee worked, a real simple program, and we're going to see if they worked under 40, give them what they're owed. If they're between 40 and 80, give them overtime. If they're above 80, give them double overtime. That is the world standard. So I'm going to look at the first step, which is analyze the specs. So what we need, this is going to be the analysis part, is what we need to know is, first of all, we need to know how much the hourly rate is. So we need to ask for hourly rate. We need to know how much the employee is making per hour. We need to know how many hours worked, and that is real simple, and that's just an analysis of what we need. We could get as complex as how much they made during the year, the tax rates, taking out the taxes. We could get into all of that, but we're just going to keep it real simple with that. So design-wise, this is going to be a little tricky on this program, but let's take a look at how I could design it. Does this let me draw shapes? Yay, it does. Okay, good. Shapes make life easier. So we got a little thing here, and I don't know if I can draw it there. But we'd ask for, let's see here. This is kind of fun, isn't it? So we'd ask for their name, going to come out bad. And then we'd ask for hours. We're on the design aspect, by the way. Hours. How many hours, and then hourly rate. And then what we need to do, what we haven't done, is then we need to figure out, okay, how are we going to calculate this? Oh, that's cool. So the analysis is after we figured out, okay, we're bringing this in, then it needs to perform calculation. And we can even get as far as to conclude that, okay, we could use if statements here. So if under 40, we do rate times hourly. Oh, I'm going to move this guy over again. Continue on. If between 40 and 80, rate times hourly times 1.5, because it takes 1.5 of the rate. If above 80, then it is rate times hourly times 2. That's your basic calculation. So then we need to output the information. So we do need to output our result. So we're getting to basic design principles here. So the last thing we would need to do is produce an output, which will go right there. This slide's getting a little sloppy, so I'm going to move to the next slide to describe the implementation. Nah, you know what, I'm not going to. Implementation would then be going and coding this, which we've already gone and laid out how it's going to look. So that's happening right here. And we've already outlined what our code needs to do. So this is going back to Programming 1 where we talked about basic steps of planning. That's what's happening right here. Testing and debugging, you would want to then for your testing, and that's where I think we'll move this out of the way a little bit. Actually, we'll just move that out of the way. For the testing, you would want to choose 4 or 5 testing spots. So that could include -2 hours. Let's make this black. -2 hours, because that will produce a negative result, and you don't want that. You do then something like 25 hours, 40 hours, 45 hours, and then 81 hours. That right there would test every condition that could possibly be, and we could do tests to see if it's the correct answer. And then, of course, maintenance. What happens if we find an error later? Who's responsible for updates in case they change minimum wage? There's a lot of different ways we could take it. I'm just doing a real simplistic example.